I was so impressed with Essendon, and the Essendon fans would be. Their percentage is not huge, but that doesn't matter. All that matters is your win-loss and how you go about it, and they've got players to come back as well. But Brad Scott, after the game, spoke about the impact of the Bombers supporters, the Bombers army getting in behind his team. And they're a young team that are pressuring really well, playing for each other. The thing I love about them most is their forward line. There's always been questions on their ability to defend, and they've improved that aspect of defending the full ground. But their forward line actually puts a lot of pressure on. They're not a high-scoring side. They're the ninth best offense in the comp at the moment. But on the weekend, I rate GWS's defensive, their back six, and they're actually able to pull them apart with their ball use and then with their forwards. Langford was huge, kick four, forced Taylor to be moved off. I think he was on Jones, and Jones was actually taking him up the field, or Wright was taking Taylor up the field to move him out of the forward 50 so that you still had Langford and Stringer, and Gresham was still going to work. Guelphy, who's a disruptor, but hit the scoreboard with 3. Davies got some speed. Hines got some speed to get down there. And their midfielders are hitting the scoreboard here and there. Perkins, Caldwell out of the middle, Merritt, Durham every now and then. So they've got some pieces there. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned Stringer, but they've got some pieces there that they can manipulate and move and adjust their forward setup because they're not stayed. It's not Curnow, Mackay. They've got a different forward setup, and it's adaptable to be able to unpack the opposition's back six and expose the opposition's back six. So I think that's one thing that they do really well in that front part. The other is I think that they're scrappers. Because they're a little bit undersized. I love Jones as a tall player who puts a lot of pressure on. Langford puts pressure on because as a 6'3" who can hit the scoreboard, but the ball hits the ground, he's just as good. When Stringer's on, he's going to give that pressure to you as well. But I really like what they're doing that front third, and I think their defence actually starts there with the pressure they put on.
And I thought they got their matchups right. So credit to Brad. I think he had a terrific day in the coach's box. Kelly and Green, Kelly's having a really solid year. That's one of the toughest matchups in football to do that. And Toby Green had a couple of moments, but Kelly was terrific. Guelphy, Whitfield. Bang, done, got that done. I thought Mackay on Hogan was enormous. That was a great battle early in the first half. And Jesse Hogan, I think, took 4 marks in the first quarter, and Mackay kept him to 3 touches in the second half. And he was a great interceptor as well. And can I just mention Todd Goldstein? Is there a more underappreciated player in the history of the game than Todd Goldstein? He's building a Hall of Fame-like career, Todd Goldstein. When you look at what he's doing, in terms of the best ruckman that we've ever had, he's joining that conversation. We speak Max Gawn, obviously, and rightly so, and there's many others before him. But in terms of a top 10, 15 ruckman all time, this guy's about to turn 36, and luckily Essendon got him.
Yeah, well, in the end, what's happened with Draper, and Wright did a lot of ruck work on the weekend as well. And Goldstein, you don't need to be an 85, 90% player, and he's not going to be able to do that given his age. Nick Cox missed that handball to him, and he couldn't get down to it. Goldstein's response, he didn't actually give it a lot of airtime. He just headed straight back up. I think Cox was supported by other teammates. He just headed straight back to centre bounce, efficiency. And then I've got a job to do. Apparently, he's the ultimate professional. Yeah,
we had McGrath in the Sunday Footy show yesterday. Terrific guy, Andy McGrath, and I don't think you'd mind saying off camera what he said, just how good a teammate he is and the role that he's playing and how much the midfielders love playing with Todd Goldstein. So I thought he needed some recognition because I think for far too long, and he's been in poor sides recently in North, he hasn't got the credit that he deserves.
Yeah, he's been great. And, of course, Jordan Ridley to come back, who I think will make a significant difference to the Bombers' upside as well. Second one for me is Port Adelaide's win and their performance. I mean, we're setting the game up for Fox and just couldn't see how Port, with Rosie out, going to Geelong, were going to be able to challenge the way they did. But it was set up for an ambush, and that's exactly what happened. Find some energy after last week. Now, I know the showdown and the focus and all that, but it's probably Port over the last 3 or 4 weeks haven't quite been as dynamic, haven't quite been able to find their way. Rosie in and out, injured. And even with the stars through their midfield, they've just struggled to find that coherence in their game. But we saw that in spades on Friday night. Everyone everyone at Geelong would have been wary of that happening. Coaches would have been aware of it. There's going to be a response. Players would have been aware of it. And they would have known we've got to make sure that we start well here so that Port Adelaide, we don't give them any hope or momentum. Well, 9 minutes into the game, Port are 4-0, 4 goals to zip, and they're more than well and truly in the game. They've landed the first couple of blows and Geelong are dazed. Half an hour later, you get to 9 minutes into the second quarter, it's 11 goals to 3 when Charlie Dixon kicked a point just after that, 49 points up. And that's an ambush. That is an absolute shellacking for a team at their hometown. So it might ask some questions to the Cats, but I think what it does is it highlights the emotional requirements to play this game and how difficult it is to get up week after week after week. Port Adelaide's pressure was huge. They went forward really quickly. They determined that they would get forward really quickly and try and catch Geelong's defenders offside, which if they've coached that and seen that, you don't see that very often. So if they thought, if we pressure here that we can get in behind Geelong, I don't reckon many opposition have ever thought that they had that ability or capability. Rioli was untouched and was able to but Blake Carosello was a great one for me coaching now at SEN. He would find a way to skunk out the back. He'd find a way to not roll back. There's a lot of forwards these days that actually get coached not to go, not to sit forward or cheat or skunk. But Rioli was doing. He was reading the play, and he was backed up by midfielders and high backs that were prepared to put pressure on and get that ball going forward, because you find yourself in 15, 20 metres of space in the process.
Last week you had no concerns over Tom Hawkins, none.
Yep.
Any concerns now off the back of
my only
7 disposals?
My only concern for him is he might have to go to Darwin.
No, he's not going to go.
No, he won't go. No, but if Jeremy Cameron's not going to play, so that's going to be a very different. No, I still don't. I mean, no, I don't think that was the way that Geelong were ambushed, the way that they were pressured. It wasn't a great position for Hawkins to be in. I thought he's not going to beat his best. We shouldn't think we're going to get a return to the 28, 29-year-old Tom Hawkins, but he's still got a really important role to play for me.
Tell me about the Tigers.
Oh, look, all you want to see, I think it's worth addressing Richmond. All you want to see from your playing group is to play with spirit, and I think for the most part that's what Richmond have been able to do. Question without notice is, how would it look if Damien Hardwick was still at the helm? What do you reckon we would hear from him? Because I think Adamuze is going to be more positive. There's less pressure on him because he's only just started. And I think his press conference after the game to try and defend his players, that result and their effort was instructive. That's probably the general theme and the general trend is that the coach is seeing his players generally have a crack.
Not after that.
No, but if I think it's going to take more than one strike. I think Richmond have exceeded expectations this year. Well, in terms of
11 premiership players in that side.
They've only won one game.
I understand that.
But they beat Sydney, and that's the only game Sydney have lost. So that tells you how mucked up footy can be sometimes.
Just on that message, I need to ask. Because I just call absolute rubbish on that media. I sat through the whole thing and I'm like, how could you defend that effort?
That performance?
Yeah, but that's what he was asked about post that game. No, that effort was so far off expectation of AFL standard. I listened to that and I go, that is absolute rubbish. Then he went on to speak about Shea Bolton and his performance and his leadership. I'm watching Shea Bolton blow up at his teammates. And then I listened to Adamuze going, he showed great leadership and I was thrilled with his performance. Absolute rubbish. Compare that with what Sam Mitchell has done with Scrimshaw and his words after the game, or compare that with Michael Voss after the loss against Geelong where he was furious with his players. He needs a bit more. This is unacceptable. I just thought that was rubbish. I
think we can get caught comparing apples and oranges because Adam Uze and the evolution with his team is very different to the two that you just mentioned.
Isn't there an expectation that? Well, it's not that different to Hall. I know they're
in my estimation, the effort that I've seen from Richmond, so it's like McKelty Lafau has stood up. I don't know. Like Bolton's had a pretty good year. He only had 4 touches in the first half, did he? Something like that.
And 3 the previous first half of the week. I don't know if he has had a good year.
So if you talk about leadership as such, well, then the leadership's required when the game's on the line up front, and it's actually required when the chips are down and you need to really stand up. Now, I don't look at Shea Bolton. Leadership doesn't spill out of him for me.
Is Adam Uze going to have a hard... I think all the best coaches, and maybe you say, well, Craig McRae doesn't have a hard edge, but I reckon there's some hardness underneath. Does every great coach need a bit of a hard edge? And does he have that hard edge?
Maybe.
I couldn't believe what he said after that game.
Look, I'm going to defend him because he's defending his players. He's like right now, I think Richmond, we probably even just saw it. They've fallen off the precipice. Yeah, there's going to be hard times. Yeah, so Hopper's out, Taranto's out, Lynch is out. You know, Gibcus with his knee. Graham's come back in and he does it again. Presti's come back in off a long 5 or 6 weeks off. Bolter's
a few clubs
just
with
come
injuries
back
out
in.
there though.
I know,
Collingwood got injuries. Port Adelaide got injuries.
That,
Carlton got injuries.
But when you come into injuries with momentum, when you come into injuries with a depth of leadership and understanding, you call out that there's 10 or 11 premiership players in there. They're still. They haven't necessarily been the guts of that side. Some of them might have been role players, and I think some of them have been role players. And they're missing a lot through injury. There becomes a tipping point, and for those premiership players, it becomes about, can we contend? Are the young blokes going to stand up? I think the young guys have had a real crack. So I think Uze's right in that. And I've seen performances throughout the early stages of Richmond where they just they've had a dip. They haven't won. They haven't looked likely in a lot of their games.
No, so I would.
But I think they've they've exceeded what I thought would happen on that day.
Yes, but I would agree.
Until the weekend,
I would agree in part with that point. But he's not speaking about he's asked to sit there and address what went on at the MCG on Saturday night, and he's saying I can't fault the effort. I'd love to know his thoughts after he reviewed the vision, because he was watching a different game from the coach's box than the rest of us were watching on TV. That was a performance that lacked any serious effort.
Later in the morning, I want to talk to you about an optimism scale and where coaches sit on an optimism scale, because I think the most optimistic coaches, sometimes the ones that are prepared to take the flak for seeing things too favourably, I think they're the ones that help their players through the tough times more. Just to highlight and recognise, the game that was, what a great game it was to watch. And I think Adelaide, I love watching Adelaide. I think they've got great scope, and I think it disappointed a little bit by the position that they put themselves this year, the grit they showed last year, the position they're in now. But I get a sense that they're away. They play Collingwood next week. It'd be really interesting to see how that goes with an undermanned Collingwood.
3-5-1. After 9 games, can they? Is that it? Can they push? I don't think so. I think it's open enough. Like I had an initial thought. You watch the Anzac draw and you think that felt like a win for both sides because the 2 points is going to be great for them. It basically puts them ahead of the sides that are going to be 2 points behind them, logically. But the Brisbane Adelaide, I thought it felt like a loss for both. But in the end. It is what it is. And then the coaches' perspectives are interesting. So that optimism scale, again, I think Fakes is right up the pointy end of the optimism scale, and Matty Nix was bleeding a little bit more about it. And to be able to find the good in any situation, it's all about perspective. And in the end, it comes back down to the relationship of the coach to his players and the belief that the players have in the coach's message. We only see the tip of the iceberg with the presses, but I thought, Brisbane they are back. You can see their energy was a lot better, like compared to the GWS game a few weeks back. And you criticised Fakes about his presser then, and I thought, that would have been a really hard presser to sit in and to deliver, because he's trying to be optimistic, he's trying to find reasons, and he's not wanting to tip on his players, and ultimately.
the last couple of weeks has shown, even though they've got 1.5 wins out of the 2 games, it's shown that their energy has returned. They've endured injuries, but they've still been able to produce these high efforts. So the coach is clearly pulling the right rein behind the scenes to give them that energy back.
They've got an opportunity now. Richmond, Hawthorn in the next 2 weeks. Then after the bye, Western Bulldogs, St Kilda and Port Adelaide. So they're going to have to get a move on, probably win 5, 6, 7 games in a row if they want to make a charge. What's your last point?
Last point is about tactical substitutes. And we saw it in that game last night that Crows made an early call. They took Curtin off. And the sub went on, and Worrell got injured 3 minutes into the third quarter, broke his wrist in a tackle.
Yep.
And went off 3 minutes into the third quarter. And you can see Matty Nick's anguish in the box immediately after, thinking, what have we done here? What have I done here? We saw it with the Jeremy Cameron one. My personal belief is that the game changes so quickly. This has been a conversation over the last couple of weeks in particular, but the restrictions on the sub needs to be freed up. Yes, now it's tactical instead of medical, which is great. That was made on the run. I think the concussion protocols and what we see in that, in one contest, you can go from having 4 on the bench to having 3. If you've had a tactical substitution, and I know this could be abused in some shape or form, but I don't know how it could. If you have a player who can no longer play, that's part of the 22, you've already made your substitution, whether it's Rhys Stanley, 10 minutes into the second quarter, or it's Curtin at halftime, or it's halfway through the third quarter. For the remainder of the game, if you have a player who's injured, who can no longer take part in the game from either concussion or it's a game-ending injury, the player that's fit and able, that's been subbed out, should be allowed to come back into the game.
No, that's a get-out for coaches.
What do you mean it's a get-out for coaches?
Matthew Nick, well, you didn't see Chris Fagan go with his sub at halftime. Just because Matthew Nicks has made an error by going and making a sub at halftime and then getting an injury 5 minutes later, that's on Matthew Nicks. He shouldn't be then with a get-out pass to go, no, I've made an error here by making my sub too early.
There's no get-out pass. I'm not talking about the
can then put Curtin back on.
No, I'm not necessarily saying it because of yesterday. It's a common sense approach. If you have an injury late in a game, even with 15 minutes to go and 20 minutes to go, it has an impact. If you have an injury late in the game and your opposition are now 22 and 21 versus 21, and this happens regularly and consistently, but if you're a team that's down to 3 rotations and you have a fit player on the bench, and he just happens to be the player that's been subbed out, he should be allowed back in.
Then just don't have the sub. Would be a far easier solution. Just have 5 on the bench, which is what the coaches are pushing for.
There's a possibility that there's no sub into season 2025.
Hopefully, it's shocking.
If I'm the AFL, they're loath to make rule changes through the year, but just do it now. It makes no sense at all. If you have 2 or 3,
scrap the sub now.
So if you have 2 or 3 injuries, if you have two or 3 injuries late, make an early sub, have 2 or 3 injuries late, and you're down to 2 rotations, you've got a fit player sitting on the pine. It makes no sense at all. If it's forced and if it's through injury, and there's a fit player on the ground, he should be on the bench. He should be in rotations,
sack the sub now.
Well,
no one likes the
I
sub.
think that'll happen.
Done nothing for the game.
I think it'll happen anyway. But I'd love the AFL. I'd love the AFL to make that shift on it for the remainder of 24.
What's your thoughts? Let us know. Join in the conversation. The Mosa Homes open line. It is open. 1300 736 736. And the Chris Scott one, we're
pretty critical.
That was public humiliation almost of Rhys Stanley.
Yeah, wasn't it?
It's going to be hard to come back from that. And it's not just that performance against a 4-gamer and you're subbed out with 11 minutes to go in the second term all over. But it wasn't just Rhys performances
Stanley.
Leading up to that as well.
Yeah, but it wasn't just Rhys Stanley. It was the fact that something needed to change, and they had Mullins and they put him directly onto Horn Francis. So who of the 22 out there can we do away with most, or do we need to shift another element of the game? And it ended up being the ruckman. The ruckman is a really easy way to change the flow of a game if you go a little bit smaller. And Blitzavs went in, and it looked a lot better, but. Yeah, we make some judgments about coaches on very little information, even people in the media, and that's why I'd probably defend them more than not.
But I think you're allowed to be critical, or you're allowed to question whether you've gone with the sub too early at half time. I think that's a fair criticism, and you end up drawing the game and you lose a player 5 minutes after. I think even Matthew Nicks would go, did I go too early?
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches have been really careful with making sub calls, and we've seen at the evolution of it, it happens earlier and earlier because they see it as an advent to change the game. I mean, that was an aggressive substitute of Stanley for Mullins to go on, but it ended up being the right call.
That one you go, okay, what's the damage to Stanley? But they're 49 points down and they need to change something. What's the worst that can happen? Well, you lose the game. You're already going to probably lose anyway. The Knicks one was a little bit different.